All right, well, joining me on the line today is a well-known businessman and author, and he's one of America's top publishers. He is the editor-in-chief of business magazine Forbes, as well as the president and CEO of its publisher, Forbes Media. He was a Republican candidate in the U.S. presidential primaries both in 1996 and in 2000. My guest today is Steve Forbes. Steve, thank you so much for joining us on Follow the Money Weekly Radio.
Very good to be with you. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Steve, well, we had you on several months ago, and of course we were taking a look at the political landscape and the economic landscape. And I tell you, things are just still very tense right now, especially on Wall Street, as we're trying to figure out how to take this nation forward. We really are lacking leadership. And recently you made a statement that garnered a lot of press when you mentioned that you believe that a gold standard could be in place within the next 5 years. What did you mean when you referred to a gold standard, and what would that look like?
Well, what it means is that the dollar would no longer be a plaything of central bankers and politicians, but have a stable value, just as we have, for example, 60 minutes an hour, 12 inches in a foot, 5,208 feet in a mile. The dollar should be a stable measure of value. And the way you do it, and 3,000 years of experience has demonstrated this, is through tying it to gold. And so what you would do is you would pick a price, let's for argument's sake call it $1,500 an ounce, that's where it's floating right now, and announce the dollar's going to be gold's going to be $1,500 an ounce, and if the price goes much above $1,500, and everyone knows the Federal Reserve will tighten. If it goes much below $1,500, everyone knows the Fed will ease. It's sort of a speedometer. Cruise control. You go a certain speed, you have a certain value, and that way you don't have to worry if the politicians are going to muck around with your money. That'll be good for investment, too, instead of encouraging all this speculation we've had.
Now, I couldn't agree with you more that we do need some sort of measuring stick, and gold historically has played that role. But of course, we both know that central banks hate the constraints that gold and other types of precious metals place onto the currency in their ability to print it. How do you envision this actually taking place? Do you believe that it will be led by a sound money revolution from the public, or do you think it'll actually be introduced first at the political level? How do you envision this actually getting support?
It's going to be a mix, because I think the American public knows that what is happening now is very destructive. I think you're beginning to see support for having a real anchor to the dollar from senators like Jim DeMint of South Carolina and others. Rand Paul of Kentucky, Senator Paul certainly gets it, as does his father, Congressman Ron Paul. And I think crises in the marketplace will also push it. When people see things not going right, they're going to say, hey, you may want discretion, Federal Reserve, but you certainly don't know how to use it, and indeed they don't.
How about you, Steve? At a personal level, do you view gold as a wise investment for an individual, someone who's, maybe who has a little bit in an IRA, maybe a little bit in their own primary residence? Is gold a good diversification tool in your mind?
Gold should be seen, I think, as an insurance policy. I wouldn't have more than 5 to 7% of my portfolio in gold. It's just insurance. So if things get mucked up, you've got something to help you out. But if you're using gold as an investment, just beware. It is a very volatile thing in these circumstances. Until it's formally stabilized, the dollar, you're going to see prices fluctuate all over the place. We got a little taste of it with silver, which shot up to $50, then plunged quickly down to $34, $35 an ounce. And if you had any leverage, you'd have gotten wiped out pretty quick. So be very, very careful with this thing. See it as an anchor, not as your portfolio.
That's a great idea. How about silver itself? Do you view that as something to hold, or again, simply speculative?
Silver is even more up and down than gold. And so I would buy it, but only with the attitude of, again, small part of my portfolio, because you want an anchor, but you don't want the anchor to end up capsizing the ship.
Let's talk about QE3 because that's really been in the news lately. It's been very hot. At the end of this month, we come to the end of QE2. And there is a concern, as we're seeing in the stock markets right now, a slow creep downwards. There's a fear, Steve, that the Fed is not going to continue to stimulate, and I don't know if that is a very well-founded fear or not. What do you think?
Well, I think that the idea that the Federal Reserve can guide the economy is a preposterous one. They've never done it right in 97 years, so I don't think it's going to happen now. And but the Fed will still be mucking around in the markets, even though they won't call it QE3. They will still be buying Treasury securities and the like. So the bull in the china shop is still going to be stomping around, even if the bull's behavior has a different name attached to it.
Okay, so we definitely see QE3 coming, but probably just not called that. We continue to see simulation.
Yeah.
Okay, what about Europe? Right now, the Eurozone's in crisis, and of course, it seems to be in a perpetual crisis, and the U.S. doesn't seem to mind it because it does provide some shelter, I guess, or takes a spotlight away from the fact that we have our own sovereign debt crisis. What do you make of the Eurozone, and where do you see the euro itself going over the course of the next 5 to 10 years?
I think the euro will survive. The problem with the euro is that the European Central Bank does not know how to behave like a central bank, similar to our Federal Reserve. And they should be making the euro as good as gold. And then if a country gets in trouble like Greece, well, just because, say, a state like Illinois gets in trouble doesn't mean the dollar's going to disappear. It just means creditors are going to have a problem. And so I think the Europeans will finally come to that realization. And in the meantime, in terms of countries like Greece and Portugal, they're going about it the wrong way. They have it half right. You have to tighten your belts. That's clear. They should sell off government assets, as the Greeks are promising to do now. But the idea that you accompany this with big tax increases is absolutely counterproductive. You know, in the early 1980s, the U.S. went through a severe recession to conquer inflation once and for all. And but Ronald Reagan also made sure that there were tax cuts and deregulation in place so that the economy could quickly get back on its feet. And indeed, that's what happened. The U.S. became a global leader again. So with a country like Greece, yes, do the belt tightening, but also put in something like a flat tax so that entrepreneurs can rise up instead of crushing people with new rounds of taxes.
I think that's probably something that many people are concerned about as we head forward is the dollar itself. If we talk about the euro, the dollar, what do you see for the dollar going forward? You see a move towards the gold standard, which would mean that the dollar would find some sort of fixation or a place where it could hang its hat with gold. Do you see the dollar remaining the global reserve currency, even with the gold standard?
Oh, I think linking the dollar to gold would do wonderful things. I think people would be glad to tie to the dollar then. It just makes life much easier when you trade around the world to have a currency that you can use anywhere. And even with the dollar's weakened state, you go to countries like Argentina and elsewhere, they use dollars for transactions. They denominate contracts in dollars because they don't trust their homegrown currencies. So the sooner we link the dollar to gold, the better. And I think that circumstances will bring that about within the next 5 years. I certainly hope it will.
Okay, as we look into the next couple of years, of course, we have the 2012 presidential election on the horizon. And, you know, you've run for president. Your platform is very clear with the flat tax. We are in a world of hurt. We're in a world of mess. The Republican Party itself is even fractured in many ways. What do you see coming down the pike for 2012? Do you think Obama is going to keep this thing locked up, or do you see any hope on the Republican side, anything on the horizon?
I think the process will bring forth a strong candidate, a person who I think gets it right, having gone through the process of all the primaries and caucuses. I don't think we've seen all the candidates that we're going to see. For example, Paul Ryan may be pressured into it. The congressman from Wisconsin, Governor Christie from my home state of New Jersey may end up in it, although he doesn't want to. Others are looking at it, including Rudy Giuliani and others. So we haven't seen all the horses in the race yet, but I think at the end of the process, the Republicans will have a credible candidate to run against the president.
Do you have any plans on running yourself?
I'm an agitator now, and so I'll leave that exercising to others, the running part.
I would imagine that was a tremendous learning experience, running for president 2 times in a row, 96 and 2000. What were some of the lessons that you learned from the process?
I think that even though our culture sometimes goes crazy, especially some of these crazy reality shows, there are still very real basic strengths in this country. In short, the people are stronger than the politics.
Well, let's talk about housing for a minute. I was spending a lot of time the last couple of weeks with my head in housing prices, and we have seen, of course, housing prices take it in the gut for a couple of years now. What is your vibe? Are you very positive on the housing market going forward, or do you think we still have a lot more problems ahead?
Well, the problem with housing is that the government won't leave it alone in the name of helping us. So as a result, the process of having people who can't afford a house finally realize it and go into rentals and reestablish their lives, helping actually lenders making deals with people who have real equity in their homes. They may be suffering a bout of unemployment, but they've got an equity stake and therefore will work hard to not lose that equity. Those folks can be helped, but the government steps in and has just mucked up the waters. You know, we're going to have a housing boom in a few years. We need 1.5 million new houses a year. And through wear and tear and the growing population we still have in this country. So if the government got out of the way, you would see the market clear. You would see these inventories begin to be drawn down. And within 36 months, we're going to have to start building again, surprising as it may sound today.
I know that you're a strong proponent of capitalism. In fact, you embody it greatly. But do you ever have a concern that capitalism is completely submerged in this nation, and that the socialistic leanings are just simply taking over, not only in Washington, Steve, but even creeping into the mindsets of people with the entitlement mentality we've created now? Do you feel that real pure capitalism still has a chance in this country?
I think so, and I think you saw it in the elections last November. I think you see it in governors doing positive things in the country, even in New York. Blues of the blue states as a Democrat governor, and he's put in a budget that's less than it was a year ago. So I think most people have a common sense approach. They realize free markets work. You need sensible rules of the road, like you don't drive 100 miles an hour in a school zone, but that's very different from the government telling you what to drive, where to drive, and when to drive. Mm-hmm. And I think people see that distinction, sensible rules versus oppression.
Well, we only have a few minutes left. My guest, by the way, is Steve Forbes, obviously the publisher of the magazine and very well-known former presidential candidate, 1996 and 2000. Steve, many of our listeners are small business owners. They're entrepreneurs. They're trying to achieve great success in this country, and I believe that this country can afford that just as you do. Many people listening would love to know what kind of advice you might have for a small business owner, perhaps someone who is trying to create another stream of income, or perhaps someone who is trying to start their own business, or perhaps someone who's been in business for some time and is just really dealing with some tough times with this economy. What advice do you have for small business owners?
The words cash flow. Never let your eyes go off of the cash that's coming in and going out. Income statements are fine, but if I've seen more and more businesses done in because they didn't manage the cash right. So business people have two challenges. One is to get through this current turbulence, which means a short-term focus, but at the same time, pursuing, imagining where would you want to be, where would you want your company to be 5 years from now, and then figuring out how to get there, what risks you have to take in this, especially in this kind of environment. So it's doing two things at once, navigating the storm and figuring out what port you want to get into and what you're going to do when you get there.
Well, my guest today has been Steve Forbes. Steve, thank you so much for joining us on Follow the Money Weekly Radio. Hope to have you back soon.
Look forward to it. Thank you.